Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This morning we'll begin part 1 of 2 parts to cover this verse, text number 8, 1110H in the Bhagavatam. Vilakshana, different characteristics. Just as fire, which burns and illuminates, is different from firewood, which is to be burned to give illumination. Similarly, the seer within the body, the self-enlightened spirit soul, is different from the material body, which is to be illuminated by consciousness. Thus, the spirit soul and the body possess different characteristics, vilakshana, and are separate entities. Sounds like Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, right? It's a graduate study of Bhagavad Gita chapter 2. And it's Sankhya, or Sambandha Gyan, and this is the foundation for detachment of the soul, for the covering of the soul, while recognizing it exists and interacting with it. It's not me. It's cutting through with a sword of knowledge, cutting through the knot of false ego. Bhaktisiddhanta's translation: just as a blazing fire is different from the wood it burns to provide illumination, so the knower within the material body is different from the body itself, which is pervaded by the consciousness of the soul. It should be firmly understood that the spirit soul and the body have different characteristics because they are 2 distinct entities. And the BBT purport reads, it is analytically demonstrated in this verse that one should never falsely identify the ego with the material body. Now, ego is not in the false ego sense, it's the self-identity sense. Such misidentification is called false ego or material illusion. The following question may be raised, since it is commonly known that the Supreme Personality of Godhead enlightens the conditioned soul. Why is the term sva-drik, or self-enlightened, used in this verse? Question's clear. Because sva-drik, atmekshita sva-drik, dehad atmekshita sva-drik, deha, the body, atma, ikshita, the seer of the spirit soul, sva-drik, self-enlightened. So, enlightenment comes from the Supreme Lord. Why is it said the living entity is self-enlightened? Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that although the Supreme Personality of Godhead certainly furnishes consciousness to the living entity being endowed with the potency of the Lord has himself the capacity to revive and expand his pure consciousness. In other words, not independently, but dependently. He may therefore be considered, in a secondary sense, self-enlightened. The example may be given that gold or silver domes brilliantly reflect the rays of the sun, although the light comes from the sun. The inherent properties of gold and silver can also be considered causes for the brilliant reflection, since other substances do not possess suitable properties to reflect the sun's light. Similarly, the spirit soul can be considered sva-drik, or self-enlightened, because he possesses characteristics by which he can brilliantly reflect the potency of the personality of Godhead, thus illuminating his existential situation, just as a gold or silver dome shines due to its reflective properties. Paragraph. A nice example is given in this verse to illustrate the different characteristics of the body and the soul. Metaphor. Fire, which burns and illuminates, is always different from that which is burned, the wood, for illumination. It may be said, however, that fire is present in an unmanifest form within wood. Similarly, in the conditioned life of ignorance, the spirit soul is present, though unmanifest, within the body. The enlightened condition of the living entity can be compared to the act of arousing fire within wood. Just as fire quickly burns wood to ashes, similarly the spirit soul, when enlightened, burns to ashes the darkness of ignorance. We are conscious of the body, therefore it may be said that the body is illuminated by consciousness, which is the energy or symptom of the spirit soul. Identifying the body and soul as one is just as foolish as considering fire and wood to be the same. In both cases, the intimate circumstantial connection between fire and wood, or between the soul and the body, does not alter the fact that the fire is different from wood, or that the soul is always different from the body. Now you can imagine this is because it's a foundational type of Sankhya, there's going to be some expanded commentary on this. Bhaktisiddhanta's purport, really short. Just as fire is separate from wood, the wood it burns, one that which burns and the other is that which is burnt, the spirit soul is distinct from the gross body and subtle mind. He is self-manifest and minutely independent. Refined understanding. Here's Bhaktisiddhanta's gloss of Vishwanath's commentary. One should not maintain the false egoistic conception of I and mine in relation to the material body. The gross and subtle bodies covering living entities are made of the material elements, but the spirit soul is transcendental to matter. The spirit soul possesses the transcendental qualities of the Lord, but in minute quantity. In this verse, the soul is described as self-enlightened. Because the conditioned soul is enlightened by the mercy of the Lord, one may question, how can this be? Self-enlightened versus enlightened by the mercy of the Lord. Although the Supreme Personality of Godhead certainly furnishes the living entity with consciousness, being endowed with the potency of the Lord, has himself the capacity to revive and expand his pure consciousness. Living entity. Paragraph. In this regard, the soul is compared to gold and silver, which, although having no power of self-illumination, brightly reflects the rays of the sun. Thus, it may be said that the gold and silver possess the power to illuminate, although not independently. This verse gives an example to illustrate how the spirit soul is distinct from the body. Just as Fire is distinct from wood, it burns. The soul is distinct from the body, it illuminates with consciousness. In the conditional state, the spirit soul is compared to fire that is dormant within wood. When the conditioned soul is enlightened on the strength of his spiritual knowledge, he can burn his ignorance to ashes just as fire burns wood. Okay, so here's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary. Bhagavad Gita, graduate level. One should not think the body is the self. The Atma, the giver of consciousness, the seer or perceiver, is different from the subtle and gross material bodies, made of dull matter, which are objects of perception. The jiva has a small amount of consciousness. The Atma, which perceives itself, Swadrik, is different from the material objects, which are its objects of perception. How can the Atma think the body is itself? Question mark. Through Paramatma. Though Paramatma is also self-perceiving, the jiva is perceived by the Paramatma. Though the jiva is revealed by Paramatma, jiva also has some power to reveal. Although gold and silver are illuminated by the sun, they have some power of illumination as well. An example is given of the difference between the body and the soul, or Paramatma. Fire, a burning agent, is different from wood, which is burned, because the revealer, that's fire, prakashaka, that's for fire. The revealer or fire is different from that which is revealed, wood. Just as the fire remains covered by the wood, the jiva is covered by ignorance. And just as fire burns wood and becomes uncovered by it, the jiva, at the stage of knowledge, becomes the burner of ignorance by his knowledge. From the Sankhya perspective, all of this is important, and we're not accustomed to seeing through the lens of the Sankhya teaching, fundamental teachings of Sankhya. It can be a little confusing or like redundant or something pedantic. But refinement to see the world around us and see ourselves, etc. properly, Sankhya is there as like a lens to look at things. So using that language, the Sankhya language, it's quite clear. This is not that, and here's how you can make some distinctions and some metaphors to help understand the distinctions. Swadrik is one of the big ones, self-illuminating or self-revealing. Does not mean totally independent. That's the idea. Kramasandarbha, Jiva Goswami writes, because there will be extreme possessiveness because of intense relationships with wife, etc., it is unavoidable to seek out their special benefit, unquote. The relationship is rejected by Kai Mutya in 4 verses. Now remember that the previous context, it was like this very extended discussion about detachment from this and that and the other thing. Wife and children and home and possessions and land and stuff. Detachment from. And now what Jiva Goswami is explaining here, and he's going to expand on it further, it's this sense of mama, or possessiveness, because that was the previous topic. Wife, children, etc., 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 is mine. I, with misconception, and mine with misconception. So this misconception of possessiveness, because of an intense or extreme possessiveness with family, because it's very proximate and very dear to one, etc. And possessiveness in terms of those things is stronger than possessiveness of things that aren't so intimately connected to us. Therefore, focus. It's like one devotee asked a question. When I found out that my friend contracted or was infected by the COVID disease or virus, I prayed a lot and so forth and so on. Although I know there's so many other people that enter a similar situation. So is there something wrong with that, or is it some offense? It's quite natural. Not something wrong with it. But the excessive attachment to the temporary, excessive sense of mind is most likely to be reposed in those things we're most intimately connected with. And therefore the conversation is going, Krishna's conversation with Uddhava is going to that. And so this is the philosophical underpinnings of mind, not just extensions of mind, meaning the body, because the other things are extensions of the body. Whatever however broad thinking one may be, it's still rooted in bodily conception. That, my community, my race, my, humanity, my nation, whatever. It's rooted in the bodily conception. So this is this, and the next three verses are focusing on that fundamental misconception of the soul identifying with mind, starting with body, gross and subtle. So these nice metaphors, fire and wood, silver and gold domes reflecting the light of the sun, so there's luminous. So it's a fundamental understanding of consciousness. The soul is the consciousness, not that which pervades the body. Like, you pinch your arm and you feel it, or someone pinches your arm and you feel it. But so it's not the body is conscious. The soul is conscious, and so consciousness pervades. Anyway, here's an extended discussion of this in Paramatma Sandarbha. What's Paramatma Sandarbha? Paramatma Sandarbha is one of 6 Sandarbhas by Jiva Goswami, in which he's, you can say, giving a commentary on Bhagavatam, or giving a commentary on Vedanta Sutra, which is Bhagavatam is a commentary of. And it's a section where it's dealing with Paramatma, or the Supreme Lord, in his interaction with Prakriti. Maya Jakshena Prakriti. That's a Paramatma function, to oversee Prakriti. Suyate sa characharam, whether moving or non-moving living entities, the souls are covered by Prakriti, and those souls may be moving or non-moving, but Krishna oversees everything. So that's the Paramatma function. And it's very long. Paramatma Sandarbha is very lengthy and very detailed. So this topic comes in Paramatma Sandarbha, Anucheda 19. Text 1. The individual spirit soul is the marginal potency of the Lord. The soul is counted among the associates of the Supersoul. This is explained in the following words of Srimad Bhagavatam, Jad Bharat, instructing King Rahugana. 5, Canto 5, Chapter 11, Text 12. Quote, the individual soul, bereft of Krishna consciousness, has many ideas and activities created in the mind by the external energy. They have been existing from time immemorial. Sometimes they are manifest in the waking state and the dream state, but during deep sleep or unconsciousness or trance they disappear. A person who is liberated in this life, Jivan Mukta, can see all these things vividly. That the individual spirit soul is the marginal potency of the Supreme Lord is confirmed by the statements of Padma Purana Uttarakanda, by the statements of the great Sri Vaishnava Acharya Sri Ramanujacharya, and also by the statements of the sage Jamata Muni. I looked up who's Jamata Muni. Why is he referring to him? Couldn't find much. The name means the son-in-law, Jamata. And one reference indicates Chavana Muni is also known by that name, so it may or may not be who he's referring to. But some sage, he's, making a statement and it's supported by authority. That's what he's doing. That the individual spirit soul is the marginal potency of the Supreme Lord is confirmed by these words in Padma Purana, Uttarakhanda chapter 90, quote, the individual spirit soul is full of knowledge, virtuous, beyond the touch of matter, unborn, unchanging, and naturally situated in a single spiritual form. Text 3. He, the soul, is atomic in size, all-pervading within the material body, full of spiritual bliss, a separate and distinct person, unchanging, the knower of the field of activities, eternal and different from others. He cannot be burned, cut, moistened, dried, withered, or killed. He has these and many other spiritual virtues. He is part and parcel of the Supreme. In the sacred syllable Om, the letter M stands for the individual spirit soul. The individual soul is the knower of the field of activities. He is transcendental, and he is, in his original spiritual nature, a servant of Lord Hari. He is not a servant of anyone else. Sri Jamata Muni teaches, quote, the soul is not a demigod, not a human being, not an animal, not an unmoving plant, not the material body, not the senses, not the mind, not the life breath, and not intelligence. Continuing, the soul is not made of matter, nor is he subject to the changes matter imposes. His knowledge is not limited to the perception of the material world. He is conscious. He is all-pervading within the material body. He is self-manifest. He has his own original spiritual form, which is full of spiritual knowledge and bliss. In the same quote, continuing, he is, all those things are what he's not. He is an individual person, different from other persons. He is atomic in size. He is eternally pure. In his original spiritual nature, he is a knower, a doer, and an enjoyer. Eternally, he is a part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, unquote. Now, Ramanujacharya, because he's saying these acharyas make these statements, now he's supporting. In his commentary, Sri Ramanujacharya gives the same explanation. In this way, the idea that the individual soul is a demigod or other kinds of material identity within this material world is clearly rejected. This idea is also rejected in the following words of Srimad Bhagavatam 11.3.39, which I have previously quoted in Sri Tattva Sandarbha. So this is 11.3.39. This is Narada speaking to Yudhisthira in Dwaraka. The spirit soul is born in many different species of life within the material world. Some species are born from eggs, others from embryos, others from the seeds of plants and trees, and others from perspiration. But in all species of life, the prana, or vital air, remains unchanging and follows the spirit soul from one body to another. Similarly, the spirit soul is eternally the same, despite its material condition. We have practical experience of this when we are absorbed in deep sleep without dreaming. The material senses become inactive, and even the mind and false ego are merged into a dormant condition. But although the senses, mind, and false ego are inactive, one remembers upon waking that he, the soul, was peacefully sleeping. I mean, in Tattva Sandarbha makes a big deal about this. And it's an argument, it's one of many arguments that he presents that specifically is refuting Buddhism. Or, there's a particular brand of Buddhism or a concept in one of the branches of Buddhism. Kshanik Vada Buddhism. Kshanik Vada. Kshanik is a fraction of a moment. It's a measure of time. And so that teaching says there isn't a soul. It explicitly says, some brands of Buddhism are silent. This one is vocal. There is no soul. And what is the moment. So absorb yourself that doesn't exist. Absorb the mind that doesn't exist in the moment to get to beyond the moment. And that's nirvana. Material existence is thinking that something exists, and thinking that you exist, and thinking that there is something. So those people, Jiva Goswami refutes in a number of different ways, or that teaching, in saying even in deep, because he likens that state of enlightenment where you're beyond the moment to susupti, when you're in deep sleep, when you're anesthetized. And says even when you're anesthetized, you can remember, I had good sleep. Means there's some consciousness even when you're in deep sleep. Okay, so carrying on. This morning's verse is then cited. The idea that the soul of the material body or some other material thing is again rejected by these words of the Bhagavatam, this morning's verse. So the soul is a body or some other material thing is rejected by this morning's verse. Quote, as fire is different from firewood, so the soul, seer of things, is different from the subtle and gross material bodies. And last, for this morning class, the reason why the soul is different from the material body is given by the word ikshita, which means he who sees. The word swadrik means self-manifest. This verse was spoken by the personality of Godhead. Now, just an application point is stress management. In stress management, one of the tools of those that are helping those that are like overwhelmed with stress is, tell me about, that which, the rock that hit you. Tell me about the feelings that you have about the rock that hit you. And you're the observer of that rock that hit you and the feelings. And, so connect with who you are. Or all of this is a disconnect with who you are. Suffering is not who you are. And step back from the suffering and take a look at it. I mean, that's not the only thing that stress management people do, but that's one of their techniques, because consciousness is different than that which is observed, that which the ikshita, the seer and the seen. Or that the feeling and the one who is observing the feeling. Gross or subtle. It's practical. And those that don't have that understanding, they suffer unnecessarily. And even when it looks like enjoyment, it's suffering, because it's disconnect from who you are. And it's continuing the journey of birth and death unnecessarily, which we don't, certainly there are parts of birth and death that don't look nice. You're buying into the birth and death program by not being detached from the body and the mind. So and when that absorption or abhinivesh in who you are not, then you lose your sense of self, you lose your sense of Krishna, and you're awash in the ocean of material existence, birth after birth. Okay, so now we're going to go to what's on the screen over here. A few slides. Just as fire, which burns and illuminates, is different from firewood, which is to be burned, to give illumination, similarly the seer within the body, the self-enlightened spirit soul, is different from the material body, which is to be illuminated by consciousness. Thus the spirit soul and the body possess different characteristics and are separate entities. Now this is analytical. It's Sankhya, so it can be approached just by exercising intellect to discern this from that, because that's what the intelligence function is. That's what IQ tests do. They test the capacity to discern this from that. And that's the function of intelligence. So it can stop at the level of intelligence or gyan, or it can lead one into dhyan, or meditation on the conscious observer, or sat. And then that can lead, if done in the proper sequence. Canto 3 describes it. Kapila Dev's teaching describe it. It leads to bhakti. Now that is possible when there's a bhakta teacher guiding the practitioner. So that's what is happening here. It's Sankhya, but it's making the distinction between observer and observed, like fire and the wood that's stored in the fire, but the fire is different than the wood. The wood becomes ashes and the fire doesn't go out of existence, it just goes somewhere else. It's another element. Okay, so carrying on. Hopefully the slide will change. There we go. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that although the Supreme Personality of Godhead constantly furnishes consciousness to the living entity being endowed with the potency of the Lord, has himself the capacity to revive and expand his pure consciousness. Now, that's a dependent capacity. He may, therefore, be considered as in a secondary sense, self-enlightened. This was discussed several times this morning. Now another nice graphic. Although the light comes from the sun, the inherent properties of gold and silver can also be considered causes, secondary, dependent, but causes for the brilliant reflection, since other substances do not possess suitable properties to reflect the sun's light. Similarly, the spirit soul can be considered sva-drik, or self-enlightened, because he possesses characteristics by which he can brilliantly reflect the potency of the personality of Godhead, thus eliminating his existential situation, just as gold and silver dome shines due to its reflective properties, gold or silver. And one more, here's a campfire. Nice graphic. It's short. The enlightened condition of the living being can be compared to the act of arousing fire within wood. Just as fire quickly burns wood to ashes, similarly the spirit soul, when enlightened, burns to ashes the darkness of ignorance. You know the verse from Ishopanishad, where the speaker, Rishi, that the air of life emerged with the totality of air. And so what happens when bodies are dismantled with time? Or what happens with fire that burns the wood? Where does the fire go? The totality of fire. It's an element. There's a big warehouse, a fire warehouse, a water warehouse. There's the Mahatattva is a big warehouse with elements. And when the elements mix, then you get bodies, or you get wood. And then when the elements, when time energy moves, and the fire burns the wood, and the wood goes back to the earthy elements, the water goes back to the water elements, fire goes to the fire element, and so forth. And then there's something that's the observer of all this, or the different from all this. So in this case, fire is what's being compared to the living entity, that it endures even when the wood is burned. Here we go, last picture. In both cases, the intimate circumstantial connection between fire and wood, or between the soul and the body, does not alter the fact that the fire is different from wood, or that the soul is always different from the body. Images to help understand and capture and remember the philosophy. These are nice images. So let's see if there's some discussion. We're already at 13 minutes after the hour.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. My question is, one may have the knowledge from the Bhagavad Gita. I mean, one is not the body, one is the spirit soul. But again, one might act on a bodily platform,
Mhm.
because then we give a reason, say conditioning, feelings, needs.
Yes.
So they may be true, but then one suffers because of those
Yes.
challenges.
Yes. Yes.
So it's the knowledge itself is not relieving the person from that.
It's not sufficient. It's necessary, but not sufficient.
So one gets the realization by acting on that.
Yes.
One might act on it or
Yes.
not act on it. Following.
Yes.
So how to get that realization? Before acting.
How do you get more realization instead of being conditioned? That's your question. I'm gonna, for a while at least, anytime people ask these how-to questions, I'm gonna give the same answer. Sadhu Sangha. Then you can unpack Sadhu Sangha and you look at it, all the strands of cotton that are inside the ghee wick, and then you put it back and you got a ghee wick. That's Sadhu Sangha. There are qualitative sadhu sangha, qualitative from the sadhu's side, and qualitative, more importantly even, is from our side. And it was covered a bit in yesterday evening's discussion from Canto 1, how to receive a sadhu, how to recognize a sadhu, and how to open one's heart to a sadhu. That's going to make sadhu sangha more effective. And then the hearing from the sadhu will have it'll move the heart more, and then the application will happen more. So it's, qualitative sadhu sangha, we'll say. And sadhu sangha results in bhajana kriya, and there's qualitative bhajana kriya, and so forth. That's how to. Very careful. So sadhu sangha doesn't just mean hang out, it means service. We associate with sadhus by service, and part of the service is hearing, and then part of the service of hearing is the application. And when the service light is on, then we're looking, as we're hearing, how can I apply this? Not just hoping that by standing in the shower, I just stand in the shower and I'll become clean. We don't just stand in the shower. In addition to standing in the shower, we do stuff to become clean. So it's part of sadhu sangha, the application part. But hear clearly and hear it again and hear it again, so we can refine our understanding of what we've heard, and like this question-answer activity, refining further. And then the real test is the application part. How our heart is open and receiving will be manifest by how we apply. That's, the effort part. There's the mercy part and there's the effort part. Sadhu Sangha, that's how to.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I would like to know more about the soul has a spiritual form. So it's like more technical question that was raised in Bhakti Vriksha, that all the spiritual form is, the material form is image of the spiritual form that is
Not
available?
necessarily. Because I'm looking out the window, there's some trees. Does that mean the spirit soul that's occupying that body of the tree, the spiritual form is a tree?
No.
So the answer to your question is not necessarily.
Okay. But the trees in a spiritual form in the spiritual world,
That's different.
in the same shape of the tree here, that's what's the
That's the question?
yes.
That's the question. Well, there's varieties. And is it the same varieties If that's the question, I don't know. I would say, unlimited variety, and here there's limited variety. We'll have to wait and see.
Yes, Maharaj. Thank you. And one of the thing that I heard when you were reading was some souls were born out of perspiration.
Yes.
Is it like...
It's one of the 4 types of births. It's the standard understanding within Vedic text. Born means the place of gestation. A soul may, if there's a suitable place of gestation, the soul may enter and then develop a body. From Prakriti to giving the body, and the soul entering to give life to the body. So that's one of the gestation places. Perspiration. In fermentation is similar. Okay.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. I'm not very clear about my question, but I want to attempt. I've been thinking about this complacency.
About which?
Complacency.
Complacency.
And connection with inquisitiveness. We need to be inquisitive
Yes.
to learn
Yes.
more.
Yes.
But I find this inquisitiveness goes up and down.
Okay.
So there are times when a lot of questions come as I'm reading, and there are times when I'm just hearing, not really absorbing. So is that like being complacent when the questions or the inquisitiveness is not fired up or not?
Not necessarily. It may be, but not necessarily. We'll say it the other way. Supposing there's like a zillion questions coming, does that mean you're on the other side of complacency? And when it's or that's the sign that you're not complacent. There's like a zillion questions. I know people that are have a zillion questions, so they're not really hearing. Listen to some of these Chinese classes, and where were they? They're hearing something else. They're not hearing what's spoken, and their questions are over in left field sometimes. I mean, without picking on that audience, but sometimes that happens.
So what are some signs of complacency? Because I find myself...
Remembers of Krishna slackens, and you become at the center. Okay, but that's a sign. So let's say passion. One can be passionately complacent. There's some people running around and running around and running around and running around, and they're not materially complacent, but they're spiritually complacent. So the symptom of complacency is you forget Krishna, you forget who you are, you get absorbed in duality. And you can say, well, that's all the time. So, there's degrees. And that's, welcome to the, I've been using this phrase, not there yet club. So then we recognize where we are, and we try to go to where we want to go by proper means, in good association.
Thank you.
Okay. What? Okay. Go ahead.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. My question I'm not forgive me if I'm not asking it right, but on that topic of, mama and possessiveness, and you had mentioned somebody asked, I'm praying more for my friend,
Yes.
who's affected. Now, to take it to the other extreme, where sometimes I feel like, okay, it's happening, it is ordained, and, not body, but the soul. Or to look at, for example, situations like Pankajangri Prabhu, where the whole world was praying, or Bhaktichara Swami Maharaj, where the whole world was praying, but yet the outcome was, what was ordained.
What it was, yeah.
Yeah. Does that is that making me hard-hearted?
No. That was what this person was asking. No. We're not broad-minded, but we're not hard-hearted. Okay. Let's go online.
There are two questions from yesterday and then from today also. So yesterday's questions from Amara Mataji yesterday was, we might desire to progress on the path of devotion, and at the same time Krishna is well aware of our capacity, whether I'm ready for that next step or not. So even if I desire progress in bhakti in the form of detachment or something else, it will ultimately only be bestowed by Krishna after an evaluation of whether one is capable of that next step or not. Is this understanding right?
No. Krishna's ready. Next.
Today Amara Mataji has a question. I'm trying to understand today's message. Is it the soul is equipped and completely capable of self-realization,
No. We're dependent.
and it's now its own choice whether to use
No.
it? And a question from Megha Mataji from yesterday. A question about how one should control their senses, especially about association with women in the sense of sense pleasure. Even Grahastha, Grahamedi, should not be taking this pleasure, but if only one individual believes in it,
If only what?
if only one individual believes in this and others in the family doesn't feel it, what should be the duty of the one who is believing in this Vedic way?
It depends. It depends on all the particulars. The Grahastha Vision team has a prioritized value that says the family has to stay intact. And so, following behind that priority, decisions may be made and communications may take place so that the family can remain wholesome. And then it becomes, there's many other principles, like is there some point where you draw the line? Yeah, that depends. So this person can consult the Grahastha Vision team, and they'll help guide them, in refined ways.
This is from Sachisuta Prabhu. When a soul is transmigrating from one species to the other, it is said that the subtle body, mind, intelligence, and false ego moves to the new body along with the soul. Can you please elaborate on this to understand how impressions stored in the mind from one body impacts the other, and how cognitive abilities from intelligence is carried
And how
forward.
what ability?
Cognitive abilities
Cognitive ability.
from intelligence is carried forward. How does it help to take more shelter?
Well, Supersoul is the cognitive capacity factor, up and down and sideways. So it's not just the subtle body accompanies, the subtle body carries. The subtle body is the vehicle, and the vehicle carries. And the impressions within that subtle body, intellectual and mental, are operating. And they're not operating independently, they're operating under the jurisdiction of Daiva. And then the machine moves under the direction of Daiva. And the soul is carried along. So how we, sadasad yoni janmasu, we're creating favorable and unfavorable circumstances during this very lifetime that's going to determine all the rest. What happens next, and what happens after this body, and the journey, and the next mother and father, and which species, and the whole thing. We have some role to play. Our free will choices is very significant. It's not totally independent by any means. It's a very significant role.
Question is from Shubhra Mataji. On the point of self-illumined not being totally independent, can it also be understood as not totally dependent, which then becomes the active principle of devotional service, in which the one to be revealed act or cooperate with the revealer in loving relationship and thus take active part in uncovering the covered self-identity?
Precisely. That's like the spark and the fire. The spark not only has qualities similar to the fire, but it derives its fiery quality from the fire.
This is from Uttama Bhakta Prabhu. When a conditioned soul enjoys, who actually enjoys, the mind or soul? Because the soul is the one that animates the body and the mind.
The mind. The soul isn't enjoying matter. The soul is, by that covering of matter, one thinks one is enjoying, that's the mind, but the soul isn't enjoying interacting with matter in illusory existence. The mind.
This next question is from Shriya Mataji on a similar point. It is mentioned that the soul is also the enjoyer. Could you please elaborate?
I'd like to hear the context of where it says the soul is the enjoyer. That's my reply.
This is from Apurva Anand. Does Krishna fulfill some of the most essential desires of neophytes? How to pray to Krishna so that he fulfills our desires?
The scripture tells us that Krishna does not fulfill desires if those desires are such that it causes forgetfulness of him. But if Krishna does fulfill such desires, it's done in such a way that remembrance of him results.
This is from Atulya Mataji. There are many things to apply after hearing from a sadhu. It feels like a lifetime work. Should we prioritize?
That's it. It's a lifetime work.
Could you share some principles how to prioritize what to apply?
Well, that which you hear again and again, it establishes priority. Let's just say the importance of taking shelter of the holy name. We hear it again and again, so that's a priority. And then once you have priorities, you can align other things with those priorities. Here's another. Supposing you find that there's an obstacle, internal obstacle, that that confronts you again and again and again. That's a priority. You need to give attention to it.
This is from Visalaksha Prabhu. Oh, sorry. It's not a... The next question is from Kirti Prabhu. I heard soul is an eternal associate of Supersoul. We also hear that the...
Wait a minute. Where did you hear that? Huh? I read that the soul is an eternal associate of Supersoul. Well, we're part and parcel of Krishna, but the Supersoul exists in the material world. Supersoul doesn't exist in the spiritual sky. So, the language is important. I heard. So I want to know what's this reference, what is exactly is said in precise language to be responsive, because I don't respond to something that's in that field or it's not properly reported.
This next question is from Kalpataru Mataji. I used to believe everyone was better than me, but in retrospect, I consider that just a lack of confidence or being naive.
Being naive?
How do devotees consider themselves the most fallen and yet still have confidence to act in the world?
Oh, that's easy. You have confidence in Krishna. And he's kind to the most fallen. So you're an eligible candidate. Now, this idea of most has this refutation. Prabhupada would say, you're not the most anything. Next. That's it. Anything further? Okay.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. On this point, you were referring about the stress management.
About which?
Stress management. Stress.
Stress management.
Sorry. So there may be people who may not have this knowledge and may be able to apply that to a certain extent. When we come across with those people, they have a conception and they're able to apply and they think it's all in all and I'm able to do, so I don't need any further.
Mm-hmm.
How do we guide them to this fundamental knowledge of that principle, Guru Maharaj?
Well, one of the best ways to guide them is to be a good example. Because people that don't have spiritual shelter, any solution is at best fleeting. And if you demonstrate the quality and character of one who is in Krishna's shelter, that's compelling. And they will see that. When your light's on, it diminishes darkness. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.